When someone with empathic abilities ceases accommodating everyone and begins perceiving reality, Carl Jung discovered something remarkable occurs. They don't turn self-centered. They become threatening. Not to other individuals, but to every structure that gains from their perpetual generosity. Jung labeled this shift individuation. And it represents the most dangerous achievement an empath can accomplish in a society constructed on their self-negation. Envision the instant when everything transforms. You're sitting by yourself, perhaps following another draining day of handling other people's feelings. You've agreed when you intended to refuse. You've smiled despite your suffering to maintain others' ease. You've taken in their anxiety until your nervous system appeared to be burning. But something distinct occurs this instance. Rather than continuing forward, you stop. You pose a question that transforms everything. What if I ceased? That question represents what Jung termed the start of awareness. And for the empath who ventures to respond truthfully, there exists no return to unawareness. But here's what Jung uncovered that nobody mentions. The empath's capacity to feel everything isn't really a capacity whatsoever. It's what I term survival awareness, a trauma reaction disguised as empathy. Jung witnessed this pattern continuously in his work. He stated, "The honor of existence is becoming who you genuinely are." But empaths cannot become who they genuinely are because they've never discovered who they are without others' feelings. Allow me to describe what genuinely occurs in that initial instant of awakening. The empath doesn't progressively grow more aware. They undergo what Jung termed the clash with the subconscious, an unexpected shocking realization that their complete identity is constructed on a falsehood. The falsehood that they bear obligation for everyone else's emotions. Jung recorded this precise pattern in his research on individuation. He discovered that extremely sensitive individuals frequently develop what he termed excessive empathy. They grow dependent on being required because it's the sole manner they've discovered to feel worthwhile. But when this illusion shatters, something remarkable occurs. The genuine self starts to surface. This is where Jung's research becomes transformative for empaths. He uncovered that every individual carries what he termed the shadow. All the aspects of ourselves we've dismissed or concealed. But for empaths, the shadow holds something others don't anticipate. Fury. Pure undiluted fury at being exploited, controlled, and assumed. Jung stated, "One doesn't grow enlightened by imagining images of brightness, but by making the darkness aware." For empaths, this darkness isn't wicked. It's their repressed anger, their rejected requirements, their muted voice. And when they ultimately encounter this shadow, everything changes. The empath who uncovers their shadow doesn't grow harsh. They become what I term deliberately selective. They begin perceiving manipulation methods that were invisible previously. They identify emotional parasites. They distinguish the contrast between authentic requirement and fabricated emergency. This isn't pessimism, it's perception. Jung recognized particular patterns when extremely sensitive individuals start individuation, what I term the 8 indicators of aware awakening. And if you identify these in yourself, you're undergoing what Jung termed the emergence of psychological independence. First indicator, the energy transformation. The initial indicator is what I term the energy reversal. Rather than your energy flowing outward to everyone else, it begins gathering back toward you. Jung witnessed this in his clients. When individuals cease unconsciously giving their vitality away, they abruptly possess energy for themselves. You cease feeling exhausted following social exchanges. You cease taking in everyone's negative dispositions. Most significantly, you cease feeling remorseful about possessing limits. Jung stated, "Your perception grows clear when you examine your center." Who examines outside fantasizes. Who examines inside awakens. If you've been informed you're overly sensitive, comment below, "My awareness is my power." But here's what's genuinely notable. Others perceive this transformation before you accomplish. They detect that you're no longer accessible to be their emotional repository. And some will attempt to shame you back into your previous position. Second indicator, the disguise falls away. Jung termed it the demise of the persona, the social disguise we display to belong. For empaths, this persona is typically the pleasant one, the accommodating one, the one who never refuses. But when individuation starts, this disguise becomes unfeasible to sustain. You begin stating what you genuinely consider rather than what individuals desire to hear. You articulate preferences rather than constantly deferring to others. You acknowledge when you're exhausted rather than pretending to possess endless energy. This frightens individuals who gained from your self-erasure. Jung cautioned about this stage. The most frightening thing is accepting oneself entirely. But for the awakening empath, self-acceptance grows more significant than social acceptance. Third indicator, the projection returns. This is where Jung's comprehension becomes essential. He uncovered that we frequently project our own characteristics onto others. Empaths project their awareness, their profundity, their capacity for authentic care onto individuals who don't really possess these characteristics. But during individuation, what I term the projection retrieval occurs. You cease perceiving potential in individuals and begin perceiving actuality. You cease creating excuses for negative conduct. You cease believing that everyone is simply misinterpreted fundamentally. Jung stated, everything that irritates us about others can guide us to comprehension of ourselves. The awakening empath realizes they were irritated by self-centeredness because they had repressed their own healthy self-interest for so extended. Fourth indicator, limits become holy. Jung witnessed that individuals who achieve psychological maturity develop what he termed a personal connection with the subconscious. For empaths, this signifies they ultimately begin listening to their internal signals rather than external requirements. You start refusing without elaborate clarifications. You cease feeling remorseful for possessing requirements. You identify that individuals who grow angry at your limits were gaining from your absence of them. This isn't self-centeredness. Jung termed it individual honesty. The awakening empath uncovers what I term holy self-interest, the comprehension that caring for yourself isn't merely acceptable, it's required for authentic connection with others. Fifth indicator, the remorse vanishes. This might be the most astonishing indicator for empaths. The overwhelming remorse they've carried for possessing requirements, occupying space, or disappointing others starts to dissipate. Jung termed this the incorporation of the shadow. When you cease dismissing aspects of yourself, you cease feeling remorseful for being human. You recognize that remorse was frequently your reaction to other individuals' manipulation methods. When someone states you've transformed in a disappointed manner, rather than rushing to comfort them, you consider, correct, I have, and that's the purpose. Jung stated, the individual has perpetually been unaware of themselves and has remained so. But the awakening empath grows aware of their own worth independent of others' perspectives. Sixth indicator, genuineness over validation. Jung's individuation process guides to what he termed self-fulfillment. Existing from your authentic center rather than from external anticipations. For empaths, this signifies selecting uncomfortable honesty rather than false harmony. It signifies risking others' evaluation to remain faithful to yourself. It signifies valuing your internal voice over external influence. These aren't regulations, they're directions for sustaining what Jung termed authentic existence in a society that gains from your unawareness. Jung comprehended that society designates individual awareness as self-centeredness because unaware individuals gain from others' self-disregard. When empaths begin prioritizing their own requirements, they're frequently accused of becoming distant or unconcerned. But Jung created a vital distinction. There's healthy self-interest and unhealthy self-interest. Healthy self-interest signifies accepting obligation for your own contentment rather than making others liable for it. It signifies possessing limits rather than barriers. It signifies self-maintenance rather than self-abandonment. The awakening empath discovers that caring for themselves isn't self-centeredness. It's fundamental. You cannot pour from an empty vessel. And most empaths have been operating on empty for years. Jung's concept of individuation incorporates what he termed the internal union, the incorporation of masculine and feminine psychological principles within one individual. For empaths, this signifies balancing their natural receptiveness with healthy firmness. You discover to receive energy as well as provide it. You develop the capacity to refuse as well as agree. You incorporate your nurturing character with your requirement for autonomy. Jung termed this psychological completeness. When you no longer require someone else to complete you because you've discovered to complete yourself. The awakening empath uncovers they can be both gentle and powerful, both caring and boundaried, both aware and independent. Jung acknowledged that extremely sensitive individuals possess unique capacities when they discover to manage their awareness deliberately. What I term the empath is collection, capacities that surface when awareness is directed rather than repressed. Intuitive precision grows sharp as a blade when you're not obscured by others' feelings. Creative articulation flows when your energy isn't exhausted by emotional parasites. Profound meaningful connections form when you attract individuals who correspond your genuineness rather than exploit your kindness. Jung stated, your perception grows clear when you examine your center. The aware empath develops perception that penetrates pretense to perceive truth. Jung witnessed that individuation frequently involves a period of isolation as you separate from unaware group dynamics. For empaths, this isolation can be severe. You've spent your complete existence surrounded by individuals who required you, and now you're discovering to be solitary. But Jung distinguished between isolation and seclusion. Isolation is the suffering of being separated from others. Seclusion is the satisfaction of being connected to yourself. The awakening empath discovers to appreciate their own presence for the initial instance. In seclusion, you perceive your own considerations without the disturbance of others' feelings. You uncover your own preferences without the influence of others' anticipations. You encounter yourself, perhaps for the initial instance. Jung's individuation process doesn't conclude with departure from the society. It guides to aware reparticipation. The awakening empath returns to connections and community, but from a position of selection rather than obligation. You assist others when it feels authentic, not when you feel remorseful. You participate in social circumstances when you desire connection, not when you fear dismissal. You provide your capacities to the society from abundance, not from the desperate requirement to be required. Jung termed this aware involvement, participating with existence as your genuine self rather than your performing self. Jung comprehended that psychological development isn't sequential. It occurs in rotations. The awakening empath will confront ongoing difficulties as they sustain their limits and authentic self-articulation. There will be instances of uncertainty, occasions when the previous patterns summon you back. But each rotation deepens your comprehension. Each difficulty strengthens your determination. Each limit you sustain makes the subsequent one simpler. Jung termed this spiral development. You revisit similar themes at deeper levels of awareness. The solution is acknowledging these rotations as component of expansion, not proof of disappointment. Jung believed that individuation generates obligation. When you heal yourself, you naturally desire to assist others heal. But the aware empath's purpose appears distinct from their previous people-accommodating patterns. Rather than rescuing individuals, you demonstrate healthy limits. Rather than taking in their suffering, you maintain space for their expansion. Rather than resolving their difficulties, you trust their capacity to discover their own resolutions. This is what Jung termed authentic assistance, assisting from completeness rather than injury. You become a beacon, providing illumination for those prepared to perceive, but not pursuing vessels in the darkness. Jung's ultimate objective was what he termed the self. Not the ego or the persona, but the incorporated totality of who you are. For empaths, achieving this incorporation signifies embracing all dimensions of themselves. The aware and the powerful, the caring and the fierce, the provider and the receiver. You no longer apologize for feeling profoundly. You don't repress your intuitive capacities. You embrace your intricacy rather than attempting to belong in simple categories. Jung stated, the honor of existence is becoming who you genuinely are. The incorporated empath is both powerful and gentle, both accessible and boundaried, both connected and independent. So here's what I desire you to comprehend. Your awareness is not your weakness. It's your power. Your limits are not self-centeredness. They're self-regard. Your genuineness is not excessive. It's precisely correct. Jung devoted his existence studying the process of becoming complete. And he discovered that it perpetually requires bravery. The bravery to disappoint others to remain faithful to yourself. The bravery to be solitary rather than betray your principles. The bravery to select expansion over ease. If you identify yourself in these 8 indicators, you're already on the route Jung traced over a century previously. Trust the process. Trust your impulses. Trust that becoming who you genuinely are is not merely your entitlement, it's your obligation. If you identify yourself in these transformation patterns, compose this. My breaking moment became my breakthrough. When an empath ceases accommodating everyone and begins perceiving the truth, they don't become self-centered. They become independent. They don't forfeit their empathy. They discover to incorporate themselves in it. They don't cease concerning about others. They begin concerning about themselves, too. This is Jung's contribution to every empath who's exhausted of being everyone's emotional caretaker. You don't have to carry the society's suffering to demonstrate you're virtuous. You don't have to sacrifice yourself to merit affection. You can be aware and powerful, caring and boundaried, empathic and authentic. The society doesn't require more exhausted empaths. It requires aware ones. Empaths who provide from selection not obligation, who assist from abundance not emptiness, who cherish others without abandoning themselves. If you desire to comprehend more about Jung's psychology of the independent individual, examine my presentation on why the person who requires nothing is society's greatest danger, where I investigate how psychological autonomy threatens structures constructed on human reliance. Your journey from people accommodator to aware empath isn't merely personal transformation. It's transformative, and Jung would be satisfied. Appreciation for observing. Perceive you in the subsequent dimension.